you're in. Welcome to Changes. This is Sally Ember, Edd, the host of this erstwhile, almost every Wednesday, conversation between authors. Today is February 2nd, 2015, and I am delighted to have one of my favorite guests ever because she's the first one that's been on my show that I already knew before the show. And our guest today is Ed.D. who is not living in the United States right now, and I'm going to let her tell you all about herself. Welcome, Inger.
Hey, Sally. Thank you so much for having me. This is really exciting, so thank you. Yeah, I know you from the States from a long time ago, but I currently live in the UK, in England, in the countryside, and where I spend my days writing on a good day. That's all I do. And that's what I'm doing at the moment. I'm working on my first book, and that's why Sally invited me to be on this show to talk about writing and writing life and authors and other topics that come up along the way. So thank you, Sally, for having me.
Oh, you are so welcome, and I'm really excited because you and I have a lot in common. And I remember the first time I was scrolling through my website network blog feed, and I saw this line said, "So you want to be a writer?" And I thought that was sort of an interesting title for a blog. So I start reading it, and I'm going, "Wait a minute, I think I know this person." But at that time, you weren't telling anybody who you were.
No, it's just that's because I started the blog as sort of like a public diary in a way, because I just decided, like, I've been toying with the idea of writing one. I've been toying with the idea of actually spending more time writing, getting more serious about it. And months went by, years went by, and
hold on one second, Inger. I'm going to stop you for a second. We're getting some feedback. Can you turn your speaker down a little bit?
Oh, yeah, of course. Hold on.
I think you're getting a bounce back from your voice to your speaker.
How is this?
Much better.
Okay.
Go ahead. So you were talking about your blog.
So I just started as a way of keeping track on the progress of what I was doing, and it was kind of like drawing a line in the sand saying, from here on out, I'll do something every single day that helps me on my road to becoming an author, or not necessarily, best-selling author or famous. I just wanted to spend more time developing my writing. And when I was starting the blog, I was working at the Norwegian Embassy in London, and so I just didn't want everyone there to know that, oh, look, she's on her way out, she's thinking of leaving, but, because I didn't know where it would go or what was going to happen. But once I started making that commitment to myself and writing the blog, it was kind of like setting a train in motion that was not, just could not be stopped, and I think within a week I had resigned. So there was really no reason to be secretive, Well,
I think that's really interesting because you started this blog, and I'm going to show everybody what it is, and it's called Mrs. Inger Anna Jones, MRSINGERANNAJONES.wordpress.com, and the tagline on it was, "Hi, I'm Inger. I gave up my day job to write," right? And I think that is so cool that you decided to do that, because a lot of people, even if they did it, they wouldn't admit it. I gave up my day job to write. This is my journey.
Right.
But you just put that right up there on your every page, right?
Yeah, I did, because in one way, if I made it like extreme like that, it was one way of, to me, ensuring that I would kind of keep the promise to myself. Like, no one wants to hear about someone who gave up their day job and just, fiddle their days away watching TV and eating a lot and never doing anything. So by making that like really kind of clear statement, it's like, this is what I'm doing, this is my intention, these are my goals, this is where I'm coming from. So it was just as much for me as to be interesting, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah, it's kind of like holding yourself to a commitment, or like in Buddhism we talk about maintaining our vows and all the little tricks we give ourselves to help ourselves do that. And this was like one of those things, like you made a public statement, and that kind of held you more accountable, right?
Yeah, I wanted to be accountable to me, and yeah, mostly just to me. I didn't want to write like, oh yeah, I know I said this last week, but actually what happened is that I got scared and I'm still in my day job. It's like I just wanted to go for it, basically.
I totally get that. And so I want to show people a little bit more about what you've put on this website, because not only are you sharing your journey, which I think is really interesting, but you're sharing what you learn along the way.
Right.
So on this one part of your website, you have writing tips. I love you put Lucy there, writing advice, 5 cents. That's so great. So you put up little things that you learn, and you put up examples, and you show people a little bit more of your process, kind of like turning it inside out and letting people see it. And I think that's really fantastic, because a lot of people like me, you know, I'm not unpublic about it, but I haven't really done that.
Yeah, yeah.
And
no, I mean, what happened though was that when I
go ahead.
No, what happened when I started is like, you know, I do understand that, you know, no one can. You can read all the writing tips books in the world, but what it boils down to is that you sit down and actually do it. But I have to say, though, there were certain things that kind of were like almost like game changers for me. Like when Hemingway said that he read his previous pages from the night before, he read through them again before he kept writing, because then he made sure that the tone of the voice was the same and there was some kind of continuing of the writing style. And that was totally opposite what other people say. They say, like, write through the whole thing, never look back, never take a pause. And to me, that was completely counterintuitive. So when I read that Hemingway read through his previous pages before continuing on to the next chapter, I was like, thank you for giving me that permission.
Well, it's so interesting that you bring that up, because I think a lot of writers have a real mixed reaction to reading other writers' advice.
Exactly.
Like, some people really want it, and they really read every book they can read about writing and want to hear from every writer they ever liked. And other people say, no, 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 don't pollute me. I'm creative. I have my own process.
I mean, I'm a little bit of both schools, I think, but but then I was thinking, if I wanted to be a chef or a seamstress or anything else where there's a craft I need to learn, yes, you can open up those cookbooks and you can go berserk and you can play in the kitchen. Or you can just like take a few great hints from people who've gone there before you, and they can tell you exactly why you use brown sugar instead of white sugar, and why exactly you do this thing with the eggs and whatever, you know. And so there's this way, like, the more you write and then you read people's advice, then you know how to like interact that to your own life. But if you just read either or, like, no, I'm not going to take any advice because I'm so great, I'll learn by myself, or block all advice out, I think both is too extreme. I like the way of writing a lot and then going back and reading how other people do it and go like, oh yeah, that makes sense, I can use that, or actually that would never work in my case, and you can be a bit selective.
Well, I really appreciate that point of view, and I've had that perspective myself, but at one point I remember reading a lot of essays by one of my all-time favorite writers, Ursula K. Le Guin. And I felt both inspired and completely intimidated by the end of that book. The one I read was called The Language of the Night. That was the first book of her essays I read. And first of all, she's such an incredible writer. It doesn't matter what genre she's writing in or what part of her career you want to look at. She's just incredible. I feel about her the way you feel about Margaret Atwood.
I was going to say, that's how I feel about Margaret Atwood.
And so I read this book of essays, and I just sat down. I remember I was in my 30s. I just sat down and I went, oh crap, I am never going to be able to write like that.
I know.
And I felt discouraged, you know, and then I thought, you know what, you really shouldn't think too much about how the sausage is made by an expert sausage maker. You should just make your own sausage.
No, it's true. I mean, you can take advice and things, but like it's holding yourself up against like an impossible standard before you even started. That's just extremely discouraging. I mean, that would discourage you from, you know, doing anything in life. So to think that you're going to start off being really perfect on your I mean, this is what happened. When I was 12, I tried to write a novel. I read the first page, hated it, threw it away, and decided I'll never write again. You know?
Oh no!
I thought you had to be some child genius, all these creative things. Either you're born with a talent or you're not. You know, that was kind of the message. It's not something you can cultivate, improve, get better at. But I realized, yeah, of course you can. I mean, not everyone can be Shakespeare, but everyone can improve.
Well, everyone can improve. And not only that, but I have a very funny epilogue to that story about me feeling the way I did about Ursula K. Le Guin's writing compared to mine. About a year and a half ago, when I first finished my ebook volume 1 of the Spanner series called This Changes Everything, I found this website that was just a fun website that was, I think it's called the Hemingway tool. And the
Right.
idea is that you take a big chunk of your writing and you copy it and paste it into this screen, and then some computer analog rhythm thing, logarithm, analyzes it and tells you which writer your writing is the most similar to.
Interesting.
So I did that, and the answer was Ursula K. Le Guin.
No.
I was over the moon. I was so excited. Hundreds of writers in this program. Hundreds. It could have been anybody. And that's the one I got.
Well, that's very good for you, isn't it?
I don't even know if it's true. I don't know who wrote the software. They could be total BS. But I had this moment of feeling really uplifted, and I remember posting it on Facebook and a few other places because I was so excited. And then I went and thought about it, and I went, oh, you know what? It's probably just BS. But I still feel good about it for a while.
No, but at this point in time, I'll take any encouragement I can get and grab onto it, because it's really important, because there's so much self-doubt and there's so much like, oh, I'm never going to be good enough, and will anyone like it? And if you start going down that road of this like negative thoughts around your own writing, then you kind of shot yourself in the head before you even begin.
Well, it's true. You do have to have a little bit of self-confidence, even to sit down and put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard. You just have to have some motivation that keeps you going.
Right.
Or you have to go do something else and come back to it. Like, for example, you are part of a drone filming company, and my friend and viewer Rain Dahl said to me on this event page for today's Changes show, you had me at a drone filming company, Sally. So we're looking forward to the show with Inger D. Kenobi. So I have to say that whenever Inger's going to talk about the drone filming company, that Rain will be happy. So maybe we should get that in now so we don't run out of time. I think we should
honor that comment. Yes, absolutely. So basically what it is that my husband and I actually resigned on the same day. We lived in London. He worked at a hospital. I worked at the embassy. So we resigned, and my thing was that I wanted to, write full-time, and his was that he wanted to have a drone filming company. So he started this drone filming company, Rogue State Media, and started filming all over the place. But he's the guy out there with the drone, filming, having fun, editing videos, making a show reel. Not so good on the admin side of, like, filing taxes and the VAT and sending out the invoices and keeping appointments straight. So because I come from a background of being a personal secretary, I kind of took on that role in this company too. But then, for some reason, I'm like director, manager, or something. That's the way it is when you're only two people. You get to have these fancy titles. So I do the paperwork, and he's out filming. And if it's a really fun location, then I go with him.
So spell out the name of his company again. I couldn't quite hear you.
It's Rogue State Media. Like, oh God, I don't remember how to spell.
Rogue, like R-O-G-U-E.
Yeah, rogue, like someone gone rogue.
Okay, Rogue State Media?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. That's very cool. And we also got a very important comment here that's a little bit belated, but from Charles Dunkley. Thank you for coming to visit us, Charles. He agrees with me that Ursula K. Le Guin's one of his very favorites also, which I'm very happy to show everybody, because I always like it when people agree with me, even for a moment.
Oh, no, that's fantastic. I always feel like I have this special kinship with people who share my love for Margaret Atwood. It's like, oh yeah, you're one of me. You're one of my tribes. You're my group.
Well, you know what's funny about Margaret Atwood, and I think a lot of other writers, in my experience, is they get this incredibly good reputation. I put Doris Lessing in that, and Joan Didion, and a few other people, that for me, then I get a book of theirs, and I start reading it, and I can't keep going.
I know.
Whatever it is about their style, or their pacing, or their characters, I just can't get into it. I want to. I really want to. I know they're good. They've gotten awards and accolades up the wazoo. I can't read them. I really tried. Well, I read Doris Lessing's science fiction, and I love that. But I couldn't read anything else she wrote.
But I know exactly what you mean. It's like going to see a movie that's been really hyped up, and you have these expectations, and it doesn't live up to half of them. And it's not even your genre. It's not even your style. And I don't think everyone needs to like anything that's a bestseller or very popular. But funny enough, though, just to like round up the Margaret Atwood thing, is that I came to her after not having read any real like regular fiction for years and years. And one of my friends, who's a professor in literature, she just threw me this book, say, hey, you might like this, and it's called The Robber Bride by Margaret Atwood. I'd never heard of her before. And I just devoured the book and realized, oh my God, this woman's still alive, she's still writing. This is incredible. So then I just started, ticking off all her books and going through it. But when I started reading her, I knew nothing about her, and I think that was a big benefit.
Well, I heard an interview with her on the radio about 3 or 4 weeks after you posted that you got to meet her. So I guess she was making the rounds. She had a new book of short stories out, The Stone Mattress.
Right.
And so she was going around talking about it, and she was in this interview, and it was a live interview on the radio. And one of her short stories in there has a character who's talking to her dead husband.
Yes, I know that one.
And continuing that throughout some of the other stories is this theme of her talking to her dead husband. So the radio interviewer says, so where did that come from, Margaret? Where did you... She goes, oh, well, I talk to dead people all the time. Which I can totally understand.
Might have what you know.
Well, then the radio announcer says, well, do they talk back to you? And she says, well, that's an interesting question. Is the person talking back to us, or is it our memory of them being enacted in our own mind that's entering this conversation, or are we just making the whole thing up, or are they really talking to us? She says, I'm not deciding that. I'm just relaying the conversation.
But it's true, though. You don't know where... that kind of reminds me of how I read about how you started writing. You woke up in the middle of the night, you had the entire story, and because you have a 10-book series, right? And you've written 2 of them.
Yeah.
And then, did you analyze, like, who told me this? Where did it come from? What is the source? What's happening here? Or did you just say, well, thank you, I'm just going to tell it. Now I've been told it.
Well, it was really a combination of curiosity and fascination and interest, and I liked the story. And
Right.
The characters are really drawn from my own experience and my family and people I know. And then they're changed. They're transformed through the story into fictional characters.
Right.
So, as I say to a lot of people, I lend my biography and the biographies of my family and friends to these characters to start with, just so I can keep them straight. Like, who's related to whom and how old are they in relation to each other and what are their interests. But then they have become other people for the most part. And the story, of course, is not something that I've told a lot of people, but the first night after I wrote all this and wrote the whole table of contents and wrote a couple chapters and wrote the 10-book synopsis, I sent that to some people in my family and friendship circle, including that first scene that the whole book opens up with, where the main character, Clara, encounters these 5 alien holograms in her bedroom and embarks on this whole new part of her life to become the chief communicator for the entire planet. And she's a 58-year-old middle-aged woman living in Northern California, just the way I was, in this little cottage just like mine. And all these things were a lot like my life. My bedroom, I used that as a model, So I get this phone call from my friend Mario Casa, who's known me since 1978. And we've been colleagues and friends, and we're like family. We've known each other for all those years. And he's a therapist. He calls me up, and he is doing an assessment. Do you know what day it is? Do you know what time it is? Do you know who the president is? And, how are you feeling? And because he thinks I'm hallucinating. He thinks
you got off the deep end.
Or he thinks maybe aliens really did visit me, and we all really should talk about this.
Oh, my goodness.
And I'm just like, well, first of all, my name's not Clara.
Right.
All right, so let's just start with that. But thank you for checking. That's very kind of you.
No, but that's really cute, though, because here's another, talk about writing tips, though. Here's a really good one that I read early on. And because people say you should be very wary about using people from your real life in the stories, because if they recognize themselves, they'll get offended or something. And she said that if if this author, forget who, she said she's used a lot of people and no one recognizes their bad qualities. So she's used someone like in a less flattering light to illustrate a point about a character in her books. They never recognize themselves. People do not see their flaws, and so you can write up the wazoo about everyone's like most blatant character, you know, whatever, and they never recognize it. But if you write, oh, she's a great baker and she's really nice with cats, it's like, oh yeah, that's me, you know, like I recognize.
That is good to know. So here's what else happened. I've had this very long unrequited love imaginary person in my life. He's not imaginary, he's real, but has taken on different persons in my life over the course of my life. There have been different people that I wanted to be with who didn't want to be with me. And
Right.
so I sort of put them all together into this one character in the book and made that the person that Clara is on again, off again with, and named him Epifanio Dong. And those names mean something to me. In foreign languages, they mean something. And they have to
Right.
do with brilliance and radiance and things like that. And so I'm writing this first draft, and I'm letting people read it, and people are writing back to me like, why did you write this character, Epifanio? He's really a jerk, and nobody likes him, and why would Clara want to be with him, and he's not worthy of her, and she needs to move on, and this guy is just
Oh my
really
God.
not likable. Why do you hate him so much? Why are you angry with him? All this kind of stuff. And I really was surprised.
Yeah, well, this is the thing, though, because people just bring their own, and I mean, everyone does. Everyone brings their own experience to the reading. You know, everyone gets something different out of the books depending on their own, you know, reality.
But I think they got something out of that book that I hadn't known because it came out of my subconscious.
Exactly. Because yeah, exactly, as you're writing it, you don't always see it either until it, like, stares back at you.
And I probably really am angry or really do see some of them as jerks.
Yes, and rightfully so, maybe. Who knows?
So now I get to get my revenge. I know there's a lot of writers who take someone they're really angry with, who've really wronged them or betrayed them, and they make them the victim in their murder mysteries.
Oh, yeah, I was just at the Cheltenham Literature Festival. Like, it's not so far from where I live. Every year they put on this amazing literature festival, all these big names. And one of the crime writers said he used to have this horrible private secretary. She was just like the most god-awful person. So in one of his books, in the first scene, she's like pushed off the balcony, you know.
I heard this other really famous female writer, I will not name her, who has been telling people for years that her first husband was so horrible that every bad character she ever writes is based on him.
There you go. Wow. That is a revenge.
No kidding, no kidding. So let's get into the other part of your public and writing life, which is your other website you've been developing more recently, which is a great name, by the way. And I want you to give us a little bit of information about that, and I'm going to show it to people. And tell us about how you decided to do this.
Well, so I was, you know, I had this, like, as you said, this writing blog. So you want to be a writer, where I just kept track of my progress as I was, you know, learning about this craft and everything. But then a lot of the stuff that I am interested in, based on the book I'm writing, is kind of how to have a more, like, be a more conscious consumer, without, you know, without being like a full-on tree hugger or not have electricity, or like, you know, what can I do in my present life to be more mindful and aware of what's going on with the environment and have a greener lifestyle, basically. Viridescent, which is the name of the website, the Viridescent Consumer. Viridescent means becoming greener. So I'm admitting this takes time, like step by step, looking at things like having a tote bag instead of plastic bags, and having a proper flask instead of buying all those plastic bottles with water, like little things like that. And so I thought, well, I'm just learning about this. I'm just going to write about my own experiences along the way of becoming a more conscious, greener consumer, and the challenges, and also the reward that comes up along the way. So I'm just, you know, I'm inspired by other people doing something similar, and yeah, kind of like that.
Well, so I want to remind people that they can go to the event page to get the spelling and the URL for this, but I'll give it to them again. It's Viridescent, Viridescent, consumer, and that's all one word, .wordpress.com. And so you put a tool on this website, which I think is fascinating because a lot of people are probably, you know, we love to take quizzes, we love to take tests that tell us about ourselves. So tell us about this carbon footprint calculator.
Well, so it's really interesting because as you walk around in your everyday life, it's really difficult to know, like, oh, if I buy another sweater or another loaf of bread, how much carbon footprint is that? It's like almost impossible thing in everyday life to know. And also, what would that knowledge, you know, gain us? But anyway, so this calculator is that you basically list like how many rooms in your house, do you have pets, do you drive to work, how many household appliances do you buy, how many vacations do you take, do you go by train, do you go by airplane, do you commute to work by train, do you commute to work by a bus or whatever. And so based on all the information you give, it says how many planets we would need if everyone lived the way you do. So when I took the test a few years back, it came up with the reply that in order to support my lifestyle, we would need at least 3 planets if everyone lived like me.
You have to have 3 planets just for yourself.
Yeah, and so that everyone on the planet lived like me. We would need 3 planets to support that kind of consumerism. And when I took it again recently, I came up with 1.7 planets. It's a bit better, but it's still not ideal.
So the World Wildlife Foundation is the source of this test that you have referred people to from your site, WWF, with the cute little panda. And you go there and you take this test, how big is your environmental footprint? And it asks you all these questions, and then it summarizes it for you, and it tells you, at the end of it all, does it tell you something about what you can do to change things?
Well, no, as far as I remember, it doesn't. But a friend of mine who took the test, she realized that previous year she had been on 3 vacations, and she thought, well, what if I start taking trains when I travel instead of airplanes? And she took the test again, and it was drastically improved. So it's a way of seeing how you can just tweak your own life a tiny bit, and it has these massive, consequences, you know, both good and bad for how you do. So it's just a way of getting more aware of your choices and what impacts they have.
Well, I think you left California before we got into this terrible, terrible drought that they've been in now for the last 4 or 5 years. But I wrote a post about a year ago about all the different ways you can save water and recycle and save water that I found was really interesting just for my own education, but also that I really was doing a lot of those things by then. But as it turned out, and of course it made me really angry to find out, none of that matters nearly as much as what the big industries are doing.
Well, of course. So there's that, you know, like, yeah, you can like, you know, eat less meat, or you can leave your car and all these things. But of course, what's going to have a huge, biggest impact is, of course, the industries, which most of them are not interested in doing anything. And I think that's, you know, extremely disappointing because, as a friend of mine pointed out, believing in like climate changes and stuff, it's not like the Easter Bunny. It's not a volunteer thing you can pick and choose if you want to like believe in it or not. It's happening, and you can just choose if you want to be a responsible consumer or a mindless consumer. That's kind of what it boils down to.
Well, and I just want to let people know they can look on the event page and see the viridescentconsumer.wordpress.com, or they can see Mrs. Inger Anna Jones.wordpress.com. They can also find you on Twitter at Mrs. Leap of Faith, but there's no periods or dashes or anything. And same thing on Instagram. They can find you Mrs. Leap of Faith. Now, for Instagram, what kinds of pictures do you put up? What are you doing with Instagram?
Well, when I moved to the Cotswolds, a friend of mine, she was like, oh my God, you should get an Instagram because it's so pretty there, because she had visited many, many, many years ago, and just so people can see where you live. So my Instagram account started as I was moving out of London. I think one of the first pictures on the account is like a bus stop from outside my house in London. And then it kind of like, it's just more of the pictures of where I live, my writing desk, endless cups of coffee. For some reason, they're very photogenic. But also when I go on walks and the nature, I see my favorite tree. We have a lot of cows here. It's almost like India. They roam freely. So there's a lot of cute cow pictures at some point. So I just take pictures of what I see, because living here is new for me too. I've only been here for a little bit over a year, and so I'm still discovering the place in a way.
Well, and that's an interesting point too, that this is not where you were born, this is not where you were raised, this is not where you spent a long part of your adult life. You've only been here a year. Now, where were you right before this?
So before the Cotswolds, where I am now, I lived in London for 4 years.
Okay. And
And
before
then,
that,
sorry,
before that,
before that, then I was in short brief back in Norway, where I'm from. I'm originally, yeah, from Norway. And then I was in California for 10 years, where I met you, amongst other people. So yeah, been around the world a bit.
yeah, so tell us what brought you to California, because that is an interesting story, and where you ended up living for most of that 10 years is also interesting. So give us a little bit of that.
Well, I had dropped out of college and I had some extra time, just to give a background story. And a friend of mine, who you also know, Helena, from high school, she had moved to California and she was like, oh, come and visit me. You have this time. Come and spend the summer with me. I've just moved to this really cool Tibetan Buddhist center. Come and see me. So I went there as her friend on summer vacation. And that was almost 20 years ago now. So, and then
So
I
you went there, and so you were both at the center that's up in Northern California, where I already knew people and I'd been there before, and you both started out there probably in the early 1990s or mid 1990s, maybe?
Yeah, that was this vacation I took was in, I believe, in 95 or 96.
Okay, so really 20 years ago, yep. And then
Yeah.
how did you decide to come back and live there?
Well, it was completely. I mean, people were like, "Oh my God, you got to go to a Buddhist center? That's like a cult, or what are you doing?" But no, no, no. I'm just visiting my friend from high school. I'm not religious. This is not my thing. I don't have a spiritual bone in my body. Don't you worry. But then I really liked it, and when I met the teachers there and the other people, it was almost like getting answers to questions I didn't even know I had. There's no really way of explaining it. I wasn't seeking. It was almost like it found me, and I thought if I don't check this out, I will regret it for the rest of my life.
So you went home, you packed up a few suitcases, and you came back?
I did. I traveled back and forth for a few years just because, getting a green card and getting a visa to the States is not exactly easy. So I traveled back and forth for a while, but then I was able to get a worker's visa, which was really cool, which allowed me to stay for a really long time.
And so by the time I met you, you were actually living at the center.
Right?
In 99, the summer of 99 was the first summer I came for a whole summer myself.
Right.
Well, I came for 7 weeks for a retreat. And before that, I hadn't been there for 10 years. I came in 89, and then I came again in 99.
Oh, my
And
goodness.
some of the teachers there were friends of mine before they became teachers, but they were living there.
Right.
And I'd gone to visit them in 89. And then I came back as a student of one of them in 99, because he had become a teacher by then. And so I was studying with him, the same teacher you were studying with, and I came there, and you were so nice to me, Inger. I will never forget that. I was really feeling like a stranger, because everything had changed so much at the center. For one thing, physically, there were all these new buildings and this whole new layout that hadn't been there before. And the whole idea of being on a long retreat was brand new to me. I'd never done this before. And I also didn't know anybody else there except the teacher. There wasn't anybody else there I knew. And so I remember that we all had to do work every day. We were assigned some kind of work. And I was there a week early because at his suggestion, he thought I needed time to acclimate. And he was brilliant. I did. So you and I were working in the big house called Tara House, doing some cleaning and linens and resetting the beds and the towels and things like that. And you were talking a mile a minute. You were talking so fast about, well, we're going to put this here, we're going to put this here, and this person's going to sleep here.
I'm very interested.
You were like explaining everything to me, and then at the end of it, you said, "And tomorrow you'll do it by yourself." I wasn't paying attention the way you would pay attention if you knew you had to remember it.
Oh my God! I should have probably led with that.
Over me. Yeah. I really didn't get it. And then I looked at you and I just like, okay, sure, I'm a smart person. I'll figure this out. And I don't know. I probably did it all wrong. But I did go in the next day and do it by myself. So
No, it's great. I mean, just for the people who, like, probably most people who haven't been there, not sure what we're talking about, it's like when my mom heard I moved to a Tibetan Buddhist center, it was like, oh my God, she lives in the forest under a tree, what's happening? You know, like she didn't know what this would be like. You know, I'm not sure what she was picturing, but it certainly wasn't what it was, because it's like 200 acres, proper structures. We didn't live in teepees. There was electricity, internet, there was a store, publishing house, event house. I mean, it was kind of civilized. It was like a little, the way I describe it to people, it's like it's a mini Tibet in the middle of nowhere.
That's true. It had a lot of Tibetan art and a lot of decorations and painting of the buildings. The structure of some of the new buildings especially was based on the original teacher, Tagda Tulku Rinpoche's direction. So he was recreating some of his favorite structures right there in Northern California.
Yeah, exactly. So it's extremely beautiful and inviting and very artistic in many ways. So I was just drawn to the fact that here these people are doing this alternative thing, but without being like total freaks, if you know what I mean. It's like we had toilets and we had beds, and it wasn't like one of these. I mean, if it had been like a flat-out super hippie commune, I couldn't have done it. That's just not who I am.
Well, and some parts of it really are more rustic than others, but you do have a choice.
Yeah,
Of how
exactly.
rustically you want to live. You can live in a yurt or a
Right.
cave or a hut with no toilet or no running water, or you can live in a house that has everything, or you can tent. I tented, so a lot of the summers I was there and used the
Right.
wash house. You know, there are all these different stages, or you can go stay at someone else's house, or you can even go a few miles and stay in a hotel if you want.
I know. I love the idea of options, and it wasn't like superimposed on you, like how you were supposed to, you know, do this thing correctly. And so that was very attractive to me.
And so then you stayed there for how many years from when you first
Well,
moved in? Did you
okay,
stay
I
there?
haven't counted from when I first visited until I left. I believe it was about, like, I was involved in that community center for about 12 years. And so it must have been like, I don't know, 2008 or something when I left, I believe. And it had to do with the fact that I felt I've been there for a long time, done a lot of things, and I felt I could not. I felt I wanted something that I wasn't sure what it was, but I knew it wasn't there anymore. And I felt that, okay, I've been inside this little nest. It's been cozy, protected, but I felt it was time to go kind of in a bigger world again. I was starting to feel a bit claustrophobic, and that was just my experience of it. And I just wanted to see how I was doing on my own, basically. And also, it was really far away from family. I missed Europe. I missed being closer to home. People were getting older. My siblings were growing up. So all those things combined was like. But when I left, it wasn't like now I leave permanently. It was more like leave for a while and see how it feels. And then I ended up staying because it was definitely the right step for me.
To stay away, right. And
Stay
then a
away,
lot of
exactly.
other
To stay
things
away.
changed. Yeah, and a lot of other things changed in that community and changed in your life that created these other things that you decided to move all the way back to the continent, as we say, and then to UK, and so there you are.
There I am. So, but you know, so it's in a way it's similar though, because I moved there kind of intuitively thinking I would regret it if I didn't, and I knew when I left, if I don't leave now, I'll regret it. And same thing about now with the writing thing. It's like it's about taking chances. It's about listening to your intuition. It's about acknowledging that what worked 10 years ago is not working now, or maybe you're about to learn something new, and it's just being a bit more like life in session instead of thinking what I do now, I'll do for the next 20 years, period, and I can never change my plan.
But so one of the things I'm noticing about both of us is we both spend a lot of time in our lives living in community. And
Right.
now we're both a little bit more isolated. Like we each, like I live right now with my mom, and you live with your husband. So we live with one person instead
Right.
of 20 or 30 or 40 or 50. At one point, I think there were 65 people living at your center.
I
Full
know,
time.
it's a lot.
Yeah, it was a lot. And so I guess what I was wondering is, now that you're not in a physical community, how are you creating community for yourself? And we talked a little bit about this before the program went live. And I wanted to ask if you've joined any groups or communities online, like say through Meetup or through Google groups or communities or Facebook, or have you made any of those kinds of connections?
Well, what I have, though, I have to say, I've made a few very in my mind, very meaningful and helpful online writer. I kind of call them friends, even though I haven't met them, but they seem to be a similar journey. They are first time working on their first book maybe, and some of them have resigned from work like I do, or some are still working. So I read their blogs and we kind of tweet to each other, and I feel like in a way, if we lived close by, we would definitely meet up and talk about this stuff over coffee. But then I'm kind of new to this. I know there are specific groups, like, we can go all in and have live chats or whatever, this kind of thing. And I've looked into that a little bit. That's one thing, because you're right. Like, being part of a community I find it extremely supportive. You can all learn from each other and, contribute, and it can also be a burden if you're too heavy reliant on it and you can't be by yourself and just focus on your own thing. You need to sit down and be really on it yourself. But I also looked around to see if there's anything locally, like writing groups or people who just, I'm in a book club. That's what I do here in this village. We meet up once a month and we discuss books and drink wine, and that's a little community. So that's very nice.
That's great. A lot of people do find book clubs through their libraries or community centers or other places, sometimes through a religious organization that just has meetings there. It doesn't even have to be about that religion. They just have meetings, So that's really good. And then I guess the other thing I was wondering is, you're trying to get your book published, and what methods are you pursuing at this point, and why have you chosen those?
Okay, so I'm pursuing at this point agent/publisher. It's the reason I go with agent is because a lot of the publishing houses will not accept books that are not represented by an agent. So the idea is to get an agent first, and they can talk on your behalf. And so the reason I went with that is because that's what I know. I worked a little bit in publishing, and my mom's worked a little bit in publishing, and I have a few friends in publishing. So that's kind of how I also started out. I approached this publishing house a few years ago with this book idea, and they're like, yeah, that sounds great. Send us ideas. And so that kind of was my ticket into this, like, getting more serious about it. But it's just that that's where I'm coming from. That's what I'm used to. That's where I know a tiny bit, not a lot. And it's not like I consciously say, oh, self-publishing is awful, it's not for me. But at this point in time, now it's more equal. I was like, oh, maybe not. But when I started out, I was like, definitely agent. That's the only way I can go. But now I'm more open to, like, both ideas. But I do also feel like there's a lot to learn from going through trying to get the agent process. You have to really, like, who am I? What is my book about? What am I trying to do here? Why is it different from any other author? Why should you take me on? So it's a way of getting more serious about yourself, I think, in one way. But also I know that a lot of people like, screw that, I'm not going to sit around and wait for rejections. I just want to write. I want to get it out there. And that's just as valid. I just think you have to do what you're comfortable with.
Well, I really like what you just said, because I, too, started out coming from a more traditional publishing background. I've been a published nonfiction author in the past and helped a lot of other people get published, and I've contributed to other things. So that was what I knew about. And at the time that I started, I still had this very negative bias about self-publishing, thinking of it like a vanity press and self-indulgent. I didn't really know how much things were changing. This was 4 years ago. And it really wasn't as big as it has become, but it still wasn't exactly what I thought it was either. It was kind of in between at that point. But I really wanted an agent, and I really wanted to go through the query process and writing a professional blurb, and going through all that was really a great discipline, and really helped me understand more about my books and about my series and how to present them and what they're about in a very succinct way. You only get 100 characters, and you only get a half a page,
you have to be really
like that. And so I think even if people decide, like I did, eventually to self-publish or start out that way on purpose, it's still a good exercise as a writer to go through the motions of submitting and writing a query and searching through the different ways people would evaluate your work, just for the purpose of improving it and learning how to give an elevator pitch and all that kind of stuff, right?
Exactly. It's all good exercise. I mean, part of what I'm, like, the way I view this is that there's no dead ends. There's only learning. And so if I, like, write a query letter and I get a rejection, I can look at it later as like, oh my God, I understand why this was, like, absolutely crappy. I did not represent the book correctly. I should have really written it differently. So it's just a way of improving and continuing improving both the writing style, but also how you represent yourself and present yourself.
So the book you're trying to shop right now is the one about going 365 days without shopping, right?
Well, so yes, it's kind of like landed in my lap a little bit just because I was actually working on another book, but then my friend gave me this challenge. Why don't we not shop for a whole year? Clothes, that is. And as I was going through, like, not shopping, which I didn't think was going to be a big deal, but it was a bigger deal and made me curious about, like, was it because I lived in London? Did it have to do with my job? Or is our consumer culture a bit more crazy than it was 10 years ago? How have we changed? And also coming back to the environment, like what kind of environmental implication does it have that we do all this shopping and we do all this, why is it so cheap? What is the hidden cost of all this cheap stuff we keep buying? And then I read somewhere that UK women shopped about 20% more than they did in the 90s, but they only wear 30% of what they own. And I thought that's a really curious thing. So I'm just trying to say that the more I didn't shop, the more I got interested in all these other topics around it: human rights issues, environmental issues, consumer issues, the paradox of choice. And so I just started taking notes about it. And my friend was like, "Why don't you write a book about that?" And so I started doing it. I really enjoyed writing it. So that's the book I'm in the process of rewriting and re-editing at the moment.
Okay. Well, then, do you have a title yet, or a working title?
I have a working title, which has like a title and an undertitle, or a subtitle. It's "How Do I Look? The Year I Stopped Shopping."
And so the kind of not shopping you're talking about is really for clothing and accessories?
It was only for clothing. Like, I could still buy books, I could still buy a necklace if I wanted to, or a plant, or whatever. It's just like no clothes.
No clothes. Okay, so you could buy
a lot.
You could buy shampoo. So it wasn't really no shopping. It was
right,
no
exactly.
clothing. Okay. All right. Well, speaking of changes like that, because that's a big change to make in someone's life if you're used to doing a lot of clothing shopping, which I'm not, but apparently a lot of people are, and that would be a big change for some people. I'm going to ask you now because you won't believe it, but it is 1:15.
I know. I just saw at the clock. I couldn't believe it.
It really just goes by so fast. So I'm going to ask you the question I ask each of my guests because I love each of your unique perspectives when you speak to it. So given all of the personal, local, regional, provincial, national, global, political, spiritual, environmental, and any other kinds of changes you're aware of, which ones arouse in you hope? Which ones arouse in you fear? What would you like to speak about in the topic of changes today? Take it away, Inger.
Well, what is up for me a lot these days is the fact that we live a lot longer than we used to, meaning we have more years on this planet to do something. So the idea, like I touched about it a little bit earlier, but the idea that you only do one thing for an entire lifetime, maybe that wasn't so crazy when you lived till you were 40 and 50. But like now we live until maybe 80 or 90, and I think it's really inspiring when people in their 70s are starting to like be costume designers, or people in their 50s are writing symphonies, or someone like mid-career decide to do something completely different. Because not only do you have the freedom to do that now, which you definitely did not have 100 years ago, but you also have the years and the possibility to do it. So in one way now, this time we live in, it's like wide open, like, for women especially, like we're not changed to the kitchen counter. We have all this freedom deciding like birth control, and we can decide. We have our own bank account. I mean, this is amazing stuff that like maybe my grandmother and great grandmother didn't have. And so in one way, that freedom is amazing and exhilarating. It can also be a bit paralyzing because it's like, am I choosing the right thing now that I have all these things to do? And what does she choose? Should I stay in my job? Should I not try to be a writer? Should I have had kids? Should I not? I mean, it's like there's so many questions, but I just think that it's truly exciting because everyone has this amazing, I mean, not everyone, but you know what I mean. It's like most people have a lot more possibilities and freedom than that we used to have, and I just think that's really interesting to see what people are doing with that, all those possibilities.
Well, I really like what you said about how different it is, especially from our own grandparents and great-grandparents for women, especially.
Yes.
And I think that's really true. And I also think it's true that one career and then retiring after 25 years is just not happening anymore.
I mean, it isn't. And I mean, what was interesting when I resigned from my job is that there was a woman at work, a dear colleague. She was like, "Oh yeah, if I had been younger, I would have done the same." And I looked at her. She was 52, and her next sentence was like, "Because I'm about to retire, so I can start doing something new now." But retirement age is 67, and that meant that she was happy with doing something she didn't really like for the next 15 years just because that was safe. And in a way, that kind of saddened me, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Well, think about it. If somebody starts a career in their early 20s and they
Right.
work at it for what we used to consider to be an entire career, which would be like in the military in the United States, and for a lot of government jobs and teachers, they think 25 years is a lifetime of service. Well, at the end of 25 years now, you're only 47. Right?
Exactly.
That's not even barely middle age, you know?
I
And
know.
so you could live another 30 or 40 or even 50 years. What are you going to do with the rest of your life, you know?
Well,
You could
that
have
is,
two more careers, you know?
I know, and those are really, I mean, to me, that's a really interesting question. And of course, there are no guarantees. How long people will live and all this stuff. So, you know, and also the idea that putting your passion on hold until you're retired, or putting off learning something you're interested in just because you think you're too old. I mean, I have a friend in her 70s who's learning to play the ukulele, and I just think that is so marvelous. It's like no one is too old to learn, no one is too old to try something new, and I just think that a lot what holds us back is just fear of failure or fear what people will think and fear of, I don't know what it is really, but I know that people with a lot more talent and resources than I do don't really go for it because it's safe where they're at. And I'm
Well,
not saying that they should stop their day
there's a
job.
lot
That is not
of
the
evidence
message
now.
here.
Go ahead.
I'm just saying if you have a passion, just why wait really?
Yeah, and there's a lot of evidence now that the more we utilize different parts of our brains, the better we are later in life. And in
Right.
particular, learning a new language is supposed to be excellent for our brains at every age, not just when we're young. And so now I
Exactly.
feel really happy that I learned Tibetan as well as I did. I started in my late 40s. And
Right.
I learned it really well. I couldn't speak it or be an interpreter, but I could read it and I could write it and I could
That is
say it.
fascinating.
And I had never learned any language before that didn't have English letters.
Oh
So it
my
was
God, yes, it is for
totally
me.
new for me, totally new.
Right.
And I had a lot of pronunciation challenges as well because they weren't sounds I grew up hearing or making with my mouth. But
Right.
my friend, Pema Lama, was my Tibetan tutor. He's a Tibetan native who grew up in India, but he grew up speaking Tibetan and knows it very well. We traded. I was helping him with his English, and he was helping me learn Tibetan. So that was really a great trade. And he told me early on that I learned Tibetan reading and writing better than a lot of native Tibetans.
Well, isn't that fascinating?
Not that I would say it better or knew what I was saying better, but my pronunciation was better and my understanding of the grammar was better. And I hear that from a lot of people. When they learn a new language, they end up speaking it more correctly than the natives.
Well, because you have to learn, you have to consciously go in and learn the grammar and learn the sentence structure and everything. I mean, English is, you know, my second language, and I think I know more about English grammar than Norwegian just because, I grew up with it more intuitively. I don't have to know the rules to use the rules correctly, but in English I have to pay a bit more attention.
Yeah, it's true. But then you have to realize by learning English at whatever age you learned it, and then whatever other languages you speak, you've learned, it creates new pathways in our brains.
I know, I find that really fascinating too, because now that, like, research, then, yeah, so then you have research supporting the whole notion that learning something new is not only fun, it's actually really good for you.
And not only that, but meditation is now having so much research to show and so many new ways of depicting it with these new brain mapping pictures and diagnostics with the diffusion tensor imaging and specialized PET scans at how much meditation impacts not just our brains, but on a cellular level, how much it helps our health. They just came out with a research study this week that says that they have proven that meditation helps heal people from cancer.
Well, see, that's remarkable. I mean, yes, because then I went to this public Buddhist talk once where they said now scientists is coming to the rescue for a 2,000-year-old tradition. We're like, yeah, you can listen to that monk up there in the Himalayas and believe him, but here's actually the scientific proof that this is actually working.
Exactly. And they've got these studies still going on at UC Davis in California and a lot of other Stanford in California, a lot of other places that are now starting to publish and starting to bring out some of their results. And I'm excited because, as you know, you and I are both meditators. We know a lot of meditators. But what's happening is meditation and mindfulness are becoming mainstream.
That's what I was going to just point out, because I have a friend who goes to these mindfulness retreats now, and she's not a, religious person. She doesn't have a lama. She didn't do what I and you did, like go and study at these retreats. But the point is, you don't have to. You can take this and you can learn it, and you will benefit from it tremendously. And I'm not sure about you, but I found it really helps also in my writing, because when I sit down to write, I'm all focused. I'm not distracted. I don't go and surf the internet. I don't answer the phone. I'm just right there with the writing, because I've trained my mind to be very focused. And I think, not that I wrote so much before meditation, and not that I'm such a great meditator, but I do have this, just this feeling that it does bleed into other areas of life and support that too, just to keep your mind still like that.
Right. Well, they've brought it into so many schools now, more than ever before, that they now have the evidence they needed to prove how helpful it is to students of every age, to calming them down and helping them center and focus, but also helping them get along better.
Well, yeah, and if you get along and if you feel happy, you are going to focus more, because it all comes back together in a really, really beautiful way. I have to say, I'm very encouraging of my friend doing this. It's like, yeah, keep going. It's really fun. Just you wait,
Right. So if you have kids or you live in a place that has public schools or private schools that don't have meditation and mindfulness programs, you could advocate for them now, and there's funding available because of the research results, and lots of people will approve it who might not ever have heard of it before. Now they've all heard of it, and they know that it helps their bottom line, which is better grades, better attendance, fewer fights, fewer vandalism incidents, lots of good outcomes.
Yeah, it is. It is. And it's not just reserved for people running around in maroon cloths and shaved heads chanting mantras, which is great. I'm glad it's coming into the mainstream. A lot of people think maybe it's a bit less authentic, but it isn't. It's just that the world is getting smaller, and we're just really learning a lot from a lot of different cultures in this really exciting way, I think.
Well, it's true. It's true, and I'm so happy that we're able to talk about this and people can find this video and hear about it. And I want to remind them, because we're coming near the end, of how they can find you, which is on https theviradescentconsumer.wordpress.com and mrsingerannajones.wordpress.com and at Mrs. Leap of Faith for Twitter and Instagram. You can find all that on the event page of this episode 20 of Changes. And I'm Sally Ember, EDD, and this is Inger D. Kenobi. And we are so glad that you were able to join us today, Inger. Do you want to give any shout-outs, thank yous, and goodbyes to anybody?
Yeah, just thank you for anyone watching now or in the future. I was going to say past, but that doesn't work. But live or in the future. And thank you so much, Sally, for having me. It's been going... The hour flew by really quickly. I thought we didn't get a chance to talk about half of the stuff we were going to talk about.
We never do. I always have this big page of notes, and we end up just not even talking about a third of it. It's really kind of funny. I know. It's really awful and wonderful at the same time. Well, what's coming up for you that you want people to know about that they could look for in your websites, your writing, any public things you're doing or putting on your blog?
Well, I'm hoping that I'm good with my setting deadlines for myself. So I'm hoping by early spring that the second rewrite of my book will be done, and then I'll see how I pursue it, either a traditional way or self-publishing. But whatever I'm doing, I will obviously write about it on the blog or tweet or whatever. It's just the way. Again, it's a public diary that keeps track of my progress and what I'm doing and what I'm up to. And so, if you're interested in following my journey, that's where it's going to be.
Okay, well, we just got a visit from Rain Dowell, who says she's sorry she's late, but Rain, I'm going to tell you, you better watch the beginning because we do refer to you when we bring up your favorite topic, which is the drone filming company. So we remembered you, and we brought you up, Rain. So you go watch from the beginning, and you'll be happy. I want to give a big shout out to everybody who decides to watch Changes, Conversations Between Authors, anytime you watch it, archived on YouTube or live. We're on almost every Wednesday, 10 o'clock U.S. Eastern Time for an hour with incredibly different kinds of authors every week. I'm so happy that next week we're going to have an historical fiction writer, Janet Oakley, Oakley, is going to be my guest. And so that's just a big change from anybody I've had on before. It's going to be episode 21 on February 11th, which is a great date to have something because I just like that date. And I'd also like to remind people that I have a website, sallyember.com, SALLYEMBER.com, where you can find a whole page about Changes. If you're an author and want to be on, or you're an author or a reader and want to recommend someone to be on, everything you need to know about it and all the URLs for the past and future shows that I have are on there. So thanks again, everybody. And Ingrid, you want to say your last goodbye?
Bye.
And I'm going to say to everybody, as I always do at the end, I hope you do well with your changes. Signing off.